Monsieur Anber.
Where is the opening? I was expecting like music, montage, gun bells and whistles and stuff. I thought you'd
Wait.
have a
So
nice
let's be
opening.
clear here. It's called Calling Russ Anber. We've been doing this here. This is episode 14, I believe. We
15,
preached that
no?
this is more, might be 15. We'll have to look at the official record books at the end there. And it's supposed to be, we preach substance over style. And the first thing you talk about is you want fancy openings, fancy montages. In this corner, I'm sorry, Russ, those days have passed, but we can maybe try to bring it back down the road here. But the montage and the segments, and we don't have that technology and that budget just yet, but we are going to get there eventually. And I appreciate people tuning in on the YouTube channel here for.
Is this your way of saying you can't do it? Is this just your way of saying you can't do it yet?
No. It's my way of saying that if we want this to happen, other stuff is going to have to take a back seat, and we'll have to make decisions on what's the priority here. But we're working on it, and you'll have your fancy montage shortly, and, and the fans and the bells and whistles, and we'll be able to add some of that.
So in the meantime, we've got a cup. Is that it? So like this could be the sponsor in and out, brought to you by. So that's our montage. Okay.
Our sales team is working hard at getting some additional sponsors, of course, here with the weeks to come, and the scheduling of the schedule, I should say, in the coming weeks is picking up for fights.
Now, did you see? There was even a tweet. Somebody mentioned that someone was interested in a mug.
That's right. One of our fans.
Yes, our fans. One of our fans. Yeah.
Hey, listen, we appreciate it. Twitter, Instagram, whatever way you want to reach out to us, and we're gonna. Now, what do you want to do? Do you want to try to honor the mug request?
Well, we'll have to try to do something
like a giveaway.
We'll have to try to think of something. The fifth caller through.
Well, you like trivia, so think of a trivia question, and somebody who gives us the an answer, that could be kind of the prize, I would think, down the road.
Bro, I could come up with a trivia question. I was going to say that nobody could answer. That way we wouldn't have to give a mug away. But now with Google, you can find out everything. People, they just cheat. What we need to do is we need to kind of figure out a way of getting someone who calls in, and you got to answer. You ask them the question right there. He's got to answer it. No chance for Googling, you see.
Montages of opening with music, phone call in. I don't think you've understood the concept of podcast just yet, Russ. I think you're still in the 90s. But hey, you know what? One day, I think traditional form broadcasting is going to maybe make a return, because clearly it's not the way things are going right now in this day and age. But that's another segment. But I do think really we're seeing more and more non-traditional podcast forms. It's the way of the future, it seems like.
Yeah, and you know what? It's given more people a platform. We've gone from one extreme to another in that, there was a certain niche group of people who had the mic. They had the audience. That was only them. That was the only place you could get the information. And it's swung all the way over now to the other side that everybody has a studio mic in their home. Like everybody's broadcasting. They got headphones and away they go. And everyone has a platform now. So somewhere along the line, we'll have to find a happy medium where people could still get, solid and credible information instead of maybe just a platform. A lot of platforms of hate and dissing people and disrespectful, and maybe that's not necessarily.
Yeah, well, social media and anonymity has led to that, of course, of more disrespect. But there's a lot of topics to get to, despite the fact there's no big fights that happened this past weekend and nothing on the schedule just yet. We're going to talk about Joe Smith in the light heavyweight picture. His fight against Maxim Vlasov gets canceled. Nothing of his fault, but because of a COVID situation, of course, and Vlasov testing positive. There's news with Lomachenko, your guy, news with Teofimo Lopez. We're going to touch on the passing of Leon Spinks later on and get your thoughts on that, Russ, which I look forward to. But I want to start off with something that made the news is Deontay Wilder, who we know has been public once since the rematch loss to Tyson Fury a few months ago, making a lot of accusations in that video, including some regarding his trainer, former trainer, Mark Breland, who he let go because feeling that Breland had threw in the towel and disrespected that. And a few other accusations were thrown, of course, at him. And Mark Breland kind of had his chance to answer this week. And I want to see if here we can share with the screen kind of the people what exactly Breland's segments and comments were here, if you give me a second. And I think it's interesting, Russ, I want to hear your thoughts of having been part of the Deontay Wilder camp at one point in his career for many, many fights. And some of what Breland was saying here is that we would wait for the champ hours before he arrived at the gym. Jay, being JD's, Deontay's manager, and another one of his trainers, would inform us of his mood. If he had a bad day, we had to be quiet, quote unquote, to not be on the receiving end of his wrath, according to Jay, in an effort to not be fired. In terms of the accusations Wilder did against Breland for the water bottle, it's so asinine, Breland says, it doesn't deserve a reply. Anyone who knows a tiny bit about boxing knows we're tested before and after the fight. So that's the end of that ludicrous allegation. But overall, like, Russ, now you were friends, of course, with Breland. You still have a relationship with him. What would be your response to Breland's comments that he really didn't pull any punches in his first kind of public statement since the accusations of Wilder?
Look, Matt, I'd love to be able to come here and tell you the tell-all, but this is not the place nor the platform to do it. You know, in due time, I have a story, and eventually, you know, that story will come out. All I can tell you about the Breland situation, and ironically, I had a phone call today with JD's as well, and I think Jay understood the position where I was coming from. I think Mark feels hurt. I think he feels betrayed. I think maybe it took him a long time to come out and say the things he said. And those things, everything you just mentioned, he probably could have said earlier, you know, instead of waiting all this time to come out and say it. And I think it took him, I think he had to really dig down deep to see if he wanted to say the things he said because of how he felt hurt, how he felt betrayed. Mark, you have to understand, Mark is one of those guys who has always been, you know, he even as an amateur, you know, even when he was arguably the greatest amateur the United States has ever produced, when he was a guy that was knocking out Russians, knocking out Cubans, like this was a devastating fighter. This guy during those amateur years, if you can imagine, overshadowing guys like Pernell Whitaker, you know, this is how great Mark Breland was. He was the guy, you know, 5-time New York Golden Glove champion. I mean, and he did it from such a quiet, you know, a quiet place. Like he was a quiet guy. He was, even to this day, you have to sit this close to him to hear him talk. You know, because
it's not that bad. I met him a few times at the Hall of Fame. It's not.
He's very quiet in his. He believes. We always make fun of him. You can ask Buddy McGirt about this. You know, we always make fun of him. You can't hear him. You know, Breland doesn't yell at somebody. You know, there's no yelling. So I think Mark hurt by that. He's a sensitive guy. He's a guy who has plied his trade. You know, he's been in the game his whole life. I think he felt disrespected. And I think the thing that also hurt was these ludicrous accusations are made, especially regarding the water. You know, like first, it wasn't bad enough that you fired the guy for what? Stopping the fight. You know, if you took a poll among every boxing fan and boxing expert in the world, you know, 9 out of 10, if not 9.5 out of 10, all would have agreed with the stoppage, you know.
And not only that, Russ, at the time that Deontay made those statements, we talked about, and you said that Breland kind of almost, I believe your words were, saved Deontay's life or the rest of his career, at least by throwing in the towel at the point he did.
Sure. And you know what, if maybe, you know, it only takes one punch to end a fighter's career. And I don't mean that he can fight again. I mean that you destroy that he never is able to come back to close to what he was before. There's just that fine line that a fighter can get broke by a single punch. And Mark stopped that from happening. You know, he stopped that. I mean, if you let Tyson Fury finish the job, who knows what it does? You stop the fight, the guy, you know, I always said that this was a case where Wilder could have continued to blame his corner for stopping it. He wanted to go on. You know, everything was right about what happened. He was given more than ample opportunity to come back in the fight. Everybody agrees he didn't look like he did. Does he have power? Yes, but it didn't even look like that was, it looked like it was laborious to even throw that power, to throw those punches. So everyone agrees that Mark stops the fight. He gets fired. which is terrible. And nobody kind of comes to his defense. Then he gets the allegations thrown at him that he was complicit in an attempt to sabotage the water and spike the water. And again, nobody comes to his defense. And I told that to Jay today. I said, you gotta put yourself in the guy's shoes. You're coming at him with that, and you're not protecting the guy. I just thought that wasn't very.
Wait, and Russ, to be clear, JD's is still part of Deontay's camp, of course.
Yes,
Mark was not. Have you spoken to Mark yourself since he was fired by Deontay?
Oh yeah, I've spoken to Mark on a few occasions. And I told Jay this as well, I've had many people reach out to me to say, we'd like to talk to Mark. And when I've approached Mark about it, he refused. He didn't want to do it. And I'm not one to force Mark to do anything. I passed the message on. I left it in his hands. I gave numbers to Mark, said, these guys want you to call them. If he did, he did. If he didn't, he didn't. As far as I know, he didn't. So I've spoken to both, and I feel bad for Mark, but I feel just as bad for Jay, because all of this, in my opinion, started by throwing JD's out into that press conference head first, with no debriefing, no team strategy on what should be said, and grabbing him out of the dressing room after you've just lost the heavyweight championship of the world. Jay, you gotta do the press conference. They throw him out into a press conference where you walk into a lion's den of reporters, or more vultures, sitting down. What happened? What do you think, Jay? Now, Jay, outside of the fights in Alabama, had never even been asked to be at a press conference. I remember we'd go to the press conference, Deontay would take center stage on his own. Jay was, and to throw Jay out there in that, and then bang, questions are coming everywhere. I know how Jay is.
Yeah, but Jay didn't say anything bad in those press conferences, as far as I recall.
You err, young man. You didn't think he said it, and he didn't think he did either. And when he said it, it was as if he was he was being honest and having a conversation with me and you. They asked him, what did you think of the stoppage? And he said, Mark is the chief second. He made the call to stop the fight. I don't agree with it, but Mark made the call. So right then and there, that was the split that, for all intent and purposes, happened, because they weren't together as a team. They didn't come together. Okay, what's going to be the debrief here? What are we going out there? And you know what? The Wilder camp would have been within their right to wait before going out to that press conference. They could have waited. They should have gathered up there. Deontay was getting stitched. His ear was getting stitched. There was things happening. I just think that he should never have been thrown out there. And then that little thing just started off this avalanche of stuff. And I think accusing Mark of his integrity, the questioning his integrity and his character as a man, as a boxing man, and nobody came to his defense. Not only from Jay or Deontay, but even from his manager, from Shelly Finkel, who managed Mark when Mark was a fighter. Nobody came to Mark's defense. And
besides media, of course, because and public opinion for the most part has been, of course, much more on Breland's side than it has been on Wilder's.
But that's just about being on whose side you're on. It's not about somebody from within the camp, somebody those people are part of the team. You look for your teammates' support. Sometimes you don't even care what the outside people say, as long as you have unanimity, with your team, and your team supports you. And I think he felt like he was kind of hung out to dry, and that, I don't think that was fair to Mark.
And I know we're not going to go into, as you mentioned, the history with you and Deontay. You'll reserve that at one point down the road. One thing, though, for people just to be clear, you work as a cut man and also involved in many training camps for Deontay for many years, when he won his title initially against Berman Steven as well.
Before he won the title.
No, I know, but that's what I'm saying. But you were there when the title was won. Because Breland, in the comments we showed a little bit earlier, and what he spoke in the interview, he also talked about the fact that there wasn't really an official cut man. It seems like since you left the team, or since you weren't part of the team anymore, they haven't really replaced you either. His comments surprised me when I read that. But Deontay, I remember him being in Montreal at the gym once. He was over for a fight. I believe he was going to watch a fight, witness a fight ringside.
He was here for Pascal against Kovalev, the first one, I believe.
Okay, and then he came by the gym. I was in the gym there, of course, and Simon Keane and Oscar Rivas were sparring. Isaac Chilembo was there with Buddy McGirt, preparing, I believe, for his fight on the undercard of the Pascal fight, or that show exactly in Montreal. I remember Deontay, his presence. So your relationship with him is something there for people who don't necessarily know. You had a big relationship at one point, and we'll go eventually into why it didn't happen. But did you get any sense from Jay what the next step is for Deontay? Were you able to talk about that at all, or is there no interest?
No, he was driving. He was with his wife and going to see his daughter's volleyball game. So we didn't get much further than that. We talked for about a half hour, primarily about that and catching up. And I consider Jay a friend of mine. Jay brought me in, and I respect him for what he does. And he's come under a lot of heat as well, and I think unjustifiably so. I think that he's come under a lot of heat, and it hasn't been fair the way he's been treated as well. So It's been an ugly situation, and it's just sad to see. And it makes me think of what Abel Sanchez said to us when he spoke to us about you take from a trainer all that intellectual property and then dismiss him, as if he's nothing. And not only do you dismiss him, you then turn around. You don't dismiss him for bad work. You don't dismiss him because he wasn't doing the job. You dismiss him because he stopped the fight. And then you try and tarnish his reputation and attack his credibility, I think is wrong. And like I said, I feel bad for Mark.
What would be kind of your inclination towards people wondering if we've seen the best of Deontay Wilder, or do you think it's a possibility that somehow he recovers from this and gets back the title or becomes still a major factor in the heavyweight division down the road?
I think the power is always going to make him a player in the division, and let's face it, I think I don't know how many guys we can say gave Fury a tougher fight. How many guys did what they did, so I mean, he stayed in there with a really dangerous opponent. Like I've said to you, to me, Tyson Fury would be a dangerous fight for anybody in history. I think he has that style, that awkwardness that makes him a very tough out for everybody. And even in the times in his career where he's been dropped, gets back up and finds a way to win, and I think we'll see Wilder back. I think the thing with Wilder is now, how do the fans take him back? How is that aura that he loved so much, the bomb squad and all that stuff, like that probably is tarnished a little bit. And I think that fans often are fickle about the fact that you're so present, you're so on when you're winning, and then something happens and you disappear, wham. And I think that upsets fans, so difficult to say physically how much it affected him. I think if anything, it's more mental than anything else, and how much it's bothered him mentally.
No, for sure. And you talked about his power. Out of curiosity, did you ever hold the pads for him at one point during training camp?
Of course, there's pictures on the internet of me holding pads. Of course I did.
Okay, well, for those who may not know about this, it's always, I think, good to revisit. And power-wise, does it match what we see in the ring? Like, is it the hardest power you've had to feel for heavyweight fighters, or for any fighter for that matter, over the years?
It sure as hell ranked up there. That right hand is strong. Like, that was like Tommy Hearns type power. That single one punch shot, was with the same way that Breland used to crush guys. And he was. Well, listen, you don't even need me to tell you that, right? Like, the results, I think, speak for themselves. I think we saw how fighters reacted when they got hit. And, Luis Ortiz is a great example. Like, Luis Ortiz, he's winning both fights. One fight, he's got Wilder going. One shot, it's a wrap.
And I'm wondering, though, for you personally, like, it's tough to compare because of the divisions. But I know in the past, I mean, you've had David Lemieux, who was awesome power for the weight he had. Adonis Stevenson, I know at one point you told me had some of the best. So I know there's fighters that you recall seeing it up front in the gym on the heavy bag or even holding pads. It's a bit different than also seeing it in a fight or as a fan or tuning in.
Yeah. You see, Lemieux had a certain type of power, completely different from Adonis's power. Adonis was like getting hit with a lead ball fired from a cannon. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't fast, but it was boom. And like, oh my God, like you were hit by a bus, right? That's what Lemieux was more explosive, bang, fast, explosive. There's different types of power. Better Biev is thundering, like Better Biev is more crushing. Like even he's a little bit more like Adonis. Like there's just like, it's as if there's lead there. You know what I mean? Like you're getting hit with a blunt force trauma, that just like, it's crazy. So different types of power. The one thing that I think people underestimated with Wilder was the speed he had. He was a guy, his execution was fast to go with that power, especially for a big guy. And that was something that doesn't translate necessarily well on a YouTube video or when you're watching on TV or on your computer. When you're in the ring, though, that lanky size and that quickness, he was quick. He was quick and he had power in that right hand.
Well, you talked about Arthur Bertabayev. The light heavyweight picture is in the news. Joe Smith, unfortunately, he's trying to get to that title shot, and his fight against Vlasov gets canned because of Vlasov testing positive.
I cannot believe that.
Well, can't you believe it's been happening? It's been happening across the board lately in boxing, especially with the bubbles, it's not been such a factor, but it's a possibility in all sports. Somebody has a chance of testing positive before the actual event takes place. We're seeing it all across all sports.
Matt, let me ask you a question. If I can be the interviewer here on this, on calling Matthew Casavan.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
The fight was this weekend, right?
It was slated for Saturday night. Now Richard Comey, lightweight, will be in the main event instead on ESPN.
I'm just trying to think, when did he must have checked into the bubble yesterday and did his test.
Probably the initial test before getting cleared, because once you're in the bubble, it's very safe. You've been in it. Like it's almost impossible for somebody to test after they're in that kind of gated hotel, if you will. And so
see, that's why it's so important, the precautions that you have to take before going into that bubble, because if you test going in, it's too late. It's too late.
Right.
It's almost like you should take a test before you go into the bubble to make sure that you're going to pass before you go into the bubble.
Right. And there's been cases, of course, of false positive in the past, but it looks like this fight is officially not going to happen. But the light heavyweight picture, one fighter who kind of threw his name out there, or at least the promotion of Joe Smith, the promoters of Joe Smith, is fighters that you know very well. And one of them being, of course, Jean Pascal, who's been in the news of late. Still trying to get Jean to show up there on our podcast. We'll see. We'll see when he agrees. We're working on that in the meantime. But I wanted to get kind of the following here for people who want to see kind of the Twitter reaction here, where he says to the promoters, of course, of Joe Smith, call Al Heyman and we can make the fight happen to unify the titles next week. Jean having a portion of the WBA title. And he takes a shot of Badou Jack, another fighter you've worked with and know well. Badou doesn't really want the fight. He is all talk. Badou has been answering back, including, you already know, we're waiting on our fight date. So there's a lot of drama with Jean. He's been active on Twitter over the last few days. And now, he's not going to get the Joe Smith fight, of course, because it's too short notice. But if you think the Badou Jack is the best option for Jean now, or do you think a Joe Smith fight for Jean is something that would be more entertaining for the fans?
Well, listen, Jean is going to be in a tough fight, whoever he fights. Like Jean just fights that way. Jean makes tough fights. Joe Smith is a tough fight. Like it's a physically enduring fight. Like it might not be pretty, but it's hard work. It's a hard night. Even if you were to win every round against Joe Smith, you come out of it you're sore for a week afterwards. You know, that's the kind of fight you're in with when you fight a Joe Smith.
And you would know because you've worked with Eleider Alvarez, of course, who lost to Joe Smith in Joe Smith's last outing, a bit of an upset with Alvarez being the former champion. Joe Smith is just a rugged, tough guy. I think is really his only kind of fallback. The fight that he didn't look good at all was against Bivol, who holds the title also at the WBA, probably the official title. Listen, Jean, I know, has a portion of the WBA title, but let's not forget that he lost to Bivol, and Bivol should be really the on guy with the belt at the WBA, but the WBA likes giving away 2 to 3 belts per weight class. It's kind of common now at this point where we're used to it, but Jean is still a factor when he talks like this, when he brings action to the ring. I would love to see Jean against Joe Smith, probably more than a rematch against Badou Jack or Marcus Brown at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure how Marcus Brown figures back in. Now, something else happened right now that just before we went on, that Gilberto Ramirez has pulled out of his fight against Marcus Brown. Now, they were supposed to go into a free negotiation, and now they didn't, so he's pulled out. And I'm not sure what the reasoning is behind that. But there is a little action in the light heavyweight division, and you're right. Jean could go in there with any of these guys, you know, and it's going to be a fight. I think Jean beating Marcus Brown the way he did, I think, you know, you don't need to have that kind of a rematch. I definitely think that there is, you know, potential for a rematch against Badou Jack, because that was a hell of a fight, you know, a close fight, hard fight. And you know, Joe Smith is waiting for a title shot. I think this thing all comes down, though, is money. I think the difficulty now is making these great fights at a price that both opponents are willing to accept, because it's just not the same as what it was before. You know, there's just that much money less on the table. And that's just, I don't care what numbers you're throwing out. There is no way you're making up for a live gate. You know, there's no way that you're creating that kind of revenue, which in many cases at big fights could be in the millions of a live gate. There is no way you're making that up. Like, that's lost revenue. And the promoter has to take it on the chin for it. Everybody's taking it on the chin, and the fighters are taking it on the chin. So I don't think it's a case of Joe Smith not wanting to fight Jean, or Jean not wanting to fight Joe Smith, or whoever of the guys not wanting to fight each other. I think it's a case of at what point, what is their price that they will fight each other. So that's unfortunately the COVID era of negotiations.
But Jean has done a great job of still being involved in the fight scene, because at one point he had retired himself. He had some tough losses that people didn't think he'd be able to come back. And despite the fact that the WBA portion of the title he has is not the same as the one Bivol has, his wins against Brown and Badou Jack were legitimate. The Badou Jack fight was very close, very tight fight. Some argued that towards the end, especially, Badou was doing better. I don't know how much demand there is really for a rematch, other than it's kind of a PBC thing with Jean having ties with Al Heyman. It makes sense for him to fight Badou or Brown, but I'd much rather see Jean fight Joe Smith. And that's the fight I would rather see. And I know Jean even was getting into a back and forth with Simon Keane, a local Quebec Canadian heavyweight, who I don't know if Jean eventually is going to move up to heavyweight. Like, Jean's a showman. He could do that because he did it against Steve Bossé to make some money against an unranked guy completely, a local Quebec guy who had been a hockey fighter for many years and was doing kind of a MMA career and then into boxing. And Jean was able to, you know, entertain the crowd for that fight. So I don't know what's going to be the future for Jean, but do you think sometimes he maybe doesn't deserve, or not that doesn't deserve, but doesn't get enough credit for the career he's had and the longevity he's had, and still being able to hold on to a portion of the title, even if it's a more minor version of the WBA?
I do. I think that people leave him out of the mix. You know, I think when we talk about the light heavyweights, because of some of the losses that he suffered, I think people leave him out of the mix, and they kind of forget that he had two wins against credible guys in Marcus Brown and Badou Jack. You know, the Jack fight, yes, was close, but it was still a great performance by Jean, as by Badou. You know, they fought their asses off. It was a hell of a fight. You know, definitely worthy of a rematch. You know, both guys left a little bit in the ring that night. You know, it was a very tough fight. I think that after that kind of, I think that after the fights that they had, sometimes it bothers me that suddenly, you respected your opponent after the fight because you got his respect in that ring. And then they go back to the chirping on Twitter and trying to make a fight. I think part of that is because of Jean not getting I don't want to say the respect, but people kind of forget that he's there. Don't you think, Matt? Sometimes they forget that he's there and could be a potential opponent. Now, would Jean
when you look at the track record,
would Jean have stepped in Saturday night?
He said that he needed another week, according to his Twitter comments. I think Saturday would have been a bit too close, especially, knowing Jean weighed 175 a few days. He probably has a few pounds to shed.
But that's the thing, that's why it's a little bit unfortunate, because it's not the following week. The date is this week. Right. It's not. So that's why it becomes a little bit. Yeah. I think though people when you think of the light heavyweight division, I think people should remember that Jean is still a player there, and until someone removes him from there, he's a player and he deserves the respect from the division. And I've always defended Jean. He's taken on the best. His resume, the names on his resume are outstanding. And I mean, Hopkins twice, Diakanu twice, Butte, Chad Dawson.
Carl Froch.
Carl Froch. I mean, he fought, and everyone, I don't care, win, lose, draw, I don't care. You were in a bloody war with this guy. You were going to war. You were not walking out of this for an easy night's payday. Not a chance. And that's still true today.
And the Kovalev two fights against Kovalev, maybe some would argue has an asterisk with what we've seen from Kovalev testing positive lately for not substance abuse, I should say, but synthetic testosterone and PEDs.
Right.
Who knows? We don't know, but I mean, I think the track record clearly is there. He's probably a borderline Hall of Fame fighter, but he probably would have needed some more signature wins and those signature fights to get there. But he's in the Hall of Very Good, no doubt about it, and probably the best, or one of the best for sure, Canadian fighters of all time.
I'm going off the top of my head right now, but if the judge in the first Hopkins fight scores Jean's knockdown and gives him the 2-point round, or doesn't give him the last round in which Jean won, I'm not quite sure what the exact one, that could have changed the course of history, because you'd go back and look at that fight. And
we can play that game all night, though, Russ, in the history of boxing.
Of course you could. But I'm just saying that changed. I just said that changed the course of history. Yes, of course you could play that game. But
yeah, no. And that first fight, it was an excellent fight. It's already been, I believe, 11 years.
It's crazy.
It's going to be 11 years this year that fight happened. So it's still a factor in the light heavyweight division. I think Berdabayev clearly has established himself, and Bivol as the two main guys, but he's still a player and a factor. And guys who are a major factor at 135, the lightweight division, is Teofimo Lopez and Vasily Lomachenko, who are both in the news, but not for the rematch that you were kind of hoping for, and I think deserve, in the fact that Loma, even if you're as a fan maybe don't want to see the rematch right away, it would have been a credible rematch. There's been much less deserving rematches, immediate rematches that have issued and happened in boxing than Loma and Lopez. But it looks like Loma, according to Bob Arum, could come back kind of in a comeback fight against a lesser known fighter, but still a fighter who presents some challenges here. A Japanese fighter by the name of Masayoshi Nakatani, who had knocked out Felix Verdejo in his last fight, but lost a 12-round decision to Lopez, Teofimo Lopez. So kind of maybe a fight that makes sense if you're Loma, to put on a performance and try to get some of these other big names at 135 to pay attention again. I'm a bit surprised that everybody, whether it's Devin Haney, Tank Davis, Ryan Garcia, and Lopez, a lot of talk amongst themselves, but they've already kind of forgotten Loma, and Loma hasn't said anything about retiring as far as I'm concerned.
It's a very peculiar situation, isn't it? I don't understand it. I've had conversations with many people in the higher ups, argued back and forth as to why is this rematch not being made? I mean, this should have technically already been signed. It should have been a no-brainer, or at worst, you both of them, like that it should happen where Lopez fights Kambosos, Lomachenko fights Nakatani, boom, the winners, it's already signed, that they're going to fight each other. Like it's already should be a done deal in the hopes of getting back towards the rematch. I don't know. There's other things obviously going on that we're not aware of. And
well, I'll tell you, I have a theory as to one of the reasons why the rematch isn't happening right away.
then
And I
go
think
ahead.
it's that Loma, besides doing a few media stuff, I believe in Russia or in Ukraine, he doesn't do much media in North America, and he didn't do many sit-down interviews or try to really push the rematch with the media here in North America. And I believe that makes a difference when you're ESPN and where you're top ranked, and you're not seeing kind of that. If he were a bit more vocal about it, I believe might have been a factor. Loma is not the the most accommodating to media. It's just a fact. So I think that probably hurts him.
I don't agree with that, because I don't think Loma has done anything different today than he's ever done.
Yeah, but he won. He was winning before. Now he lost.
So you're winning. I think this becomes from the. I don't agree. I don't think it's up to Loma to say that he would have made the difference in whether a rematch is being made or not. I think that's from the promoter's perspective. That's from TV. Does TV want that fight again?
That's right, but TV doesn't want it because Loma, he's learned English and he does interviews during the lead up to fights, but outside of that, he doesn't do much. He's just not out there enough. That's what I believe. Like, he's diehard boxing fans, of course, know him very well. He was the pound for pound top fighter, but he never translated much into, I think, enough attention in North America for now to say, well, we really have to have this rematch because the TV networks want it, and the fight, the animosity is there. Loma's been calling him out. He's been doing these press tours. He's been doing these media appearances. Look, I could be wrong. Maybe he was never going to get the rematch no matter what. Look, at least not immediately, but that's the feeling I have.
Listen, I couldn't argue with you and bet my house that you're right and you're wrong in what you're saying. Like, I don't know. It's a plausible theory for sure, but it makes sense. It could be.
Did you get a call as to when Loma could fight again this summer, though? Did you get anything other than the reports?
I have not heard yet. I was supposed to be talking to Egis because we were supposed to have somebody else fighting in end of February, but that's fallen through. So I haven't spoken to Egis about it. Maybe it's
Egis
time I give.
By the way, Loma's manager, always for.
Yeah, maybe I'll give Loma a text and see how he's doing and see what's happening.
And see if he can be a guest of the Calling Russ Anber podcast. You never know.
I know he wants the rematch. Like, he has made it blatantly clear to myself that he wants the rematch. Almost in fact threatening that if he doesn't get the rematch, he's going to retire. Like, that's the fight that he wants. So we'll see what he's going to be able to be convinced of and what kind of guarantees will be put into place. But there's no doubt he wants the rematch.
What about Lopez? June 12th is the reported date in New York for one of his mandatory defense against Kambosos. It's not an easy fight, though, for Lopez as a first title defense. I don't believe. Like, it presents Lopez is a much more talented fighter, I believe, than Kambosos. But Kambosos is tough enough where we've seen easier first title defenses in boxing.
Yeah, but the division is quite tough now. There's not a lot of easy defenses. He beat Lee Selby. I was in England when he beat Selby. Kambosos, good guy, funny guy. We had a lot of fun. Did some magic tricks for him. Good group from Australia. Lopez is special. Lopez. I saw Lopez when I was in Texas for the Callum Smith-Canelo fight. I was going through some old archive pictures, and I have a picture of me and Teofimo when he just turned pro. I mean, he might have had maybe 2 or 3 pro fights, or maybe didn't even have it. He was still wearing a USA Boxing amateur t-shirt, when we took the picture, just a young kid. And look at him now, he's champion of the world. No, not an easy title defense, but, also not an easy challenge for the challenger. You could look at it that way as well. You get a shot at the title and you got to fight a murderous power puncher like Lopez. Who's Lopez? Oh, he's the guy that beat Lomachenko. Holy, that's my shot. That's how lucky I am. I get to fight the guy that beat Lomachenko. So, not easy for either one of them. But you know what? Great champions take challenges like that. We talked earlier about Jean. Jean went from fighting Carl Froch to 6 months later, I believe, fighting Adrian Diaconu for the world light heavyweight title. He fought Froch for the super middleweight title. Then took a tune-up fight in between, and 6 months and less than 6 months later fought Adrian Diaconu for the light heavyweight title. So great champions fight great guys, and I think it's fair to say that We don't know yet what kind of champion Lopez will evolve to, but he certainly has the potential to evolve to being a great champion because he's ultra talented.
Right. And I believe we're going to be looking forward to seeing those fights happen in the summertime in that division. And there's a purse bid next week slated for Lopez. And Devin Haney's father, who has a license, Haney Promotions, Canelo had a promotion license this week. Every fighter, it seems like in the last decade or so after the Mayweather situation, are trying to have licenses of their own. And they're threatening to maybe buy the purse bid rights and try to build the Devin Haney Lopez fight. So there's fun fights to be made at 135, and I definitely think it's the best division in boxing right now at the moment, especially at the top. And we'll get to those fights down the road. There's going to be local shows in Quebec, cards in March where you'll be a part of, I'm sure. After Bertabayev, there's Oscar Rivas fighting in a show with Claude Michel. I have the Tiger announced a show that David Lemieux making his return in April. We'll have plenty of time to get to those fights. But this week, I think, Russ, of course, there's a few nostalgic situations we need to talk about. And one of them is being the passing of Leon Spinks, one of the greats of all time. And I would like for you to put the historical context, which is fun of having you, is because you've seen these fighters not only on tape, but you were part of when they kind of were brought up, maybe not involved in the boxing, of course, as much as you are now in the early stages of Leon's career. But having been a fan and seeing Leon Spinks, what would be your first thoughts about his career and when you learn about the news of his passing?
The first thought, first of all, it's sad, especially so young, so young to die, and suffered from cancer, suffered from cancer and had a lot of health problems, that his quality of life wasn't great, in the last few years. But the first thing that I thought about, and actually the first thing I always think about when people talk about Leon, only because I was a fan, because I'm a boxing fan, but the first thought I had was echoed by Buddy McGirt on his passing. And I couldn't have said it better than what Buddy said. My thoughts to Leon at light heavyweight, when he was an amateur, he was a wrecking machine. He was so good, so ferocious. Like, he would go toe to toe with the Cubans, with the Russians, like at the Olympics. If you ever get a chance to watch his Olympic Games wins in Montreal in '76. And even when you watch the first Ali fight, now we know that, this was a huge upset, and we know it wasn't Ali at his best. He wasn't somebody who prepared properly for the fight. But if you just watch the way Spinks fought, that was Spinks in his throwback to his amateur days. That was the potential he could have. And then, as with so many athletes, you reach the pinnacle and then it doesn't matter anymore. And he never, watching him, if you ran two screens simultaneously of the first fight and the second fight with Ali, like, you think that that's Leon there, you recognize him because he didn't have his two front teeth, but it was on somebody else's body, it was on somebody's. This was not, something was not right. This was not the same ferocious guy who battered Ali for 15 rounds. It was a close fight, but Ali tried, and no matter what, this kid just fired back. And, my thoughts are always going to be of how great Leon was as an amateur. And I remember when we made a comparison, myself and Scully and Buddy McGirt were on a phone call, and somebody had put out a tweet on which was, I think I told you this, the best Olympic team. Was it the '84 U.S. team or the '76 team? And right. We did a head-to-head, like if they fought each other. And Virgil Hill was was it Virgil? No, Evander. Evander was the light heavyweight in '84.
Correct.
And Leon and Buddy's, oh my God, what a fight that would have been, And like, great. Leon, he would go.
And the 1976 Olympics was 5 goals in 11 divisions for the U.S. team. Steve Farhood of Showtime, he says that's the best Olympic team of all time. But a lot of people believe it's the '84 squad, right? It's great debate. Yeah,
sadly, the '84 team didn't get the recognition it deserved because of the boycott, unfortunately. But if you looked at their results prior to the games, Whitaker was beating all the Cubans, beating all the Russians, beating the East Germans. Breland was doing the same thing. You know, there was some solid iron on that team. The ones that weren't so solid was the guys like Thomas Tate, who ended up winning the gold medal, and was it Biggs? Was not Biggs.
You're looking for the 1984 team, the rest of the gold winners?
Who beat Willie DeWitt. You know, they were losing to Willie and to Sean O'Sullivan prior to the Olympics, and then beat them there. You know, but they weren't dominating They were not dominant guys on the amateur scene.
Meldrick Taylor was part of that 84 team.
Yes, he was.
Steve McCrory.
Steve McCrory, great fighter.
And Paul Gonzalez.
Paul Gonzalez was a great 106er, you know?
Yeah, Mark Breland, of course, we've already mentioned, and Purnell as well.
Yeah.
So these are the great era of boxing. When people say how much boxing mattered back then, 90 million, I believe, was the amount of people who watched the Leon Spinks Ali rematch. It was in New Orleans in the Superdome. Like I wish I could have lived through that era of seeing when boxing was the sport in North America.
Matt, that's why when you talk to guys who have been there, you know, have been through that era, I'll go you one better than that. Back in the day when there was 3 U.S. television networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, 3, with an entire world that you had to, entire continent that you broadcasted to, okay? You used to have USA versus the world in amateur boxing on ABC's Wide World of Sports, with Howard Cosell calling the fight. Like, these guys were household names. This is something, it's not even conceivable that it happens.
In the last few Olympics, you can't even find boxing. Like, it's there, but you got to find it on a stream somewhere. It gets no coverage whatsoever.
It would be great to have Scully, Buddy, us talking about this. This would be a great podcast, just to get people to understand, like, we're not crazy when we tell you this, and people think they can't find it they can't find the YouTube, they can't find a video. Couldn't have been good, They don't understand the magnitude of this happening and the amount of eyes that were on the sport, that regularly, the champions showed up on the cover of Sports Illustrated. It was on their sports section. You opened it up, the champion was there. You knew who it was. And boy, those amateur days, I'll tell you another story that people probably don't remember. There was a newspaper, a magazine, but it was in the form of a newspaper, called The Amateur Boxer. It was a U.S. publication that talked only about amateur boxing. And if you got on the cover of The Amateur Boxer, and Howard and Otis Grant made that cover one year.
Awesome.
Yeah. And Scully will tell you that. But now you couldn't put out a magazine called The Amateur Boxer and expect people to read it and buy it. But we did.
Unless Jake Paul was on it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
No.
It's a different world now. Like, we don't care about the amateur scene. That's why everybody turns pro now. Like, back then, when you turned pro, okay, there were always guys that turned pro that, say, well, why is he turning pro? But when the amateur guy who turned pro, this was like fanfare. This guy's turning pro. It was something, you expected him for his career to go on. And that's something that on the positive side, I'm giving you the negatives, but on the positive side, with the fall of the Iron Curtain, a new world has opened up, and fighters who we never would have seen turn pro before, from countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Russia, are now not only turning pro, but they're winning, and they're winning in impressive manner. So, Beterbiev as an example, Lomachenko, Usyk, Gennady Golovkin, like, there's guys, there's some real, and you have to think that if you go back in the day, all those guys that, the Americans beat, if they'd have been allowed to turn pro, it stands to reason that they would have had a great amount of success as well.
Same with the Cubans, of course, right? Over the years, that they just last 15 years or so were able to turn pro, but there could have been some unbelievable professional Cuban fighters who had the amateur ranks for years and years.
100%. And we've seen some outstanding Cuban who have turned pro, and have been outstanding fighters. So
there's been some disappointments though with some of the hype, of course, of guys like Rindao, Gamboa, but they still become title holders. Lara, like Solis, who you knew well, kind of disappointed, but there's a lot of great situations like that, and fighters who could have been pro in the past. Now, at least, like you said, one of the positives of the amateur scene not being as great as it is we get more professional fighters who would have stayed amateur probably throughout their careers. And when you talk about the history of boxing and the big moments today, by the time we're recording this podcast here this evening, it's the 31st anniversary of Tyson-Buster Douglas. And here's one thing. I'm not a big fan of bringing the anniversaries of any sporting event every single year. Like I think 10, 15, 20, whatever. There should be a break once in a while, but it's the first time we get to talk about it. And I know it's always kind of a historical, significant fight. Probably the greatest upset, mainstream upset, of course, when Tyson went down in 31 years ago, I should say. So my point is, Russ, when you watched that fight, or do you remember the moment?
I'm so glad you asked that.
Go ahead. I want you to tell me, like, the history, like you, because I was way too young, of course, I was a baby, but you having seen it, or maybe not seen it live, but because I know it was in Japan with a huge time difference. What was the moment like? And you remember when you found out Tyson had lost?
Can you see this here? I'm trying to show you this. Can you see this? What I got around my neck here?
I can see what it is, and I've never seen you without it.
I got this in 1990 during my tour of New Zealand. I went to New Zealand in 1990 for the Commonwealth Games. I was there with the CBC, just to show you how we traveled to New Zealand to cover boxing for the Commonwealth Games. That just gives you an idea, again, the perspective of where boxing is. And when Canada is a strong nation in the Commonwealth, we wanted to broadcast that, in Canada, that Canada had a great boxing team. So I was over with a friend of mine. I was over with a guy. He was my first ever amateur fighter. I trained him in 1970, 79, 80, maybe, 79, 80, 81, somewhere around that era. He fought about 15 amateur fights, a good fighter, good puncher, okay? So he later went on to become a dentist, graduated from McGill University. I said, okay, we're going to New Zealand. We went to Korea together and then New Zealand. So I went there. We did 10 days of Commonwealth Games. And when it was over, we said we were going to tour New Zealand. So we rented a van and we drove down the east coast of the North Island, all the way down. Got to the South Island. You have to take a ferry. It's a 3-hour ferry ride. All the way down, went down to the bottom to Dunedin, and then drove all the way back up the West Coast. Okay, so we toured the country driving, and like crazy things happened. Like one night we parked, it was tired, wanted to get some sleep. So we parked on what we thought was a beach. We didn't hear anything, go to sleep. In the morning, just when the sun comes up, we start hearing, what the heck is that? We look out. Our van is basically surrounded by sea lions. We parked on a sea lion colony, like there were sea lions all around us. It was great. So the ferry ride between the North Island and the South Island. Now the one thing I don't remember is, was it on the way down or on the way back? But it's a 3.5-hour ferry ride. It's not just like a little half-hour ride. It's a big block of water in between the two islands. So my friend wants to stay up on deck and catch rays, and I'm not a sunbather, I'm not. So I don't lay out in the sun getting tan. So I said, I'm going downstairs to see what's happening. So I go downstairs, and there was a big screen on, and I don't know, whatever it was showing, and I remember dozing off, and I could hear the sounds of on a left by Tyson. I wake up, Tyson is fighting Buster Douglas. And I'm watching. Now, I'm saying, did this happen? I'm watching, first round, second round action. This is great. I'm watching on this giant screen in the bottom of the ferry boat. I'm watching Tyson and Douglas. All of a sudden, and then Douglas gets knocked down. I figure, okay, that's over. Oh, he survives. Then he knocks out Mike Tyson. And like I'm sat in front of the TV going, I run upstairs to where my friend is laying there. I said, you are not going to believe what just happened. What? I said, Mike Tyson just got knocked out. No. Yeah, I watched it downstairs. Why didn't you tell me? I'm not going to come upstairs, look for you somewhere on the boat where you are. And I watched that, and it was special. I'll never forget that. I watched it on a ferry boat crossing downstairs on a big screen. I watched Tyson fight Douglas. Tyson lose to Douglas.
That's an amazing story. And how much when you got, how long did it take you to get back to North America? Like the buzz and the gym and everybody talking about it. Like how
oh, it was,
now
it was,
back
was,
then, if there was
like
Twitter and the internet, it would have probably, the expression, it would have broken the internet, of course, of a Tyson upset to Douglas. But back then it was different, I guess. The vibe in the field, you had to, it must have been something that was across all the gyms and the talk of the town, right?
Listen, every time, everywhere we went to, if we got to talk to somebody, there was the beauty of New Zealand at the time, especially when we were there, there was 3 million. The population of New Zealand was 3 million. 1 million of that population lived in Auckland alone. So 2 million were spread out across 2 islands, and 2 islands, like I said, that are separated by a 3.5-hour ferry boat ride to go across. So it's not that you hop back and forth. If you live on the South Island, you pretty much stay on the South Island, and vice versa. You don't just go back and forth, like Vancouver Island and the mainland, get on a ferry, 20 minutes later, you're on the other side. It's a regular part of your commute. It's not a commute, okay? Right. So when we did come across people, of course they talked to the fight, but it was a while before we got back. It was a good 10 days before we got back to North America when that happened, and no communication, you didn't have nothing. So I did miss out on that, the fallout from that, because we were traveling. I'm sure that during our travels, and the reason I showed you this was because I got this in New Zealand and I've had it on ever since, but we missed out on the fallout of the impact that right. fight had on the boxing world.
And you talked about Leon Spinks and how he was never able, after that big moment, that first Ali fight, to use it and to make it into a career. Buster Douglas had some skills. Like, you look at that fight and you look at, he loses to Holyfield eventually afterwards, and he never again was able to fight the way he did against that Tyson fight. And Mike Tyson, a lot of people remember the upset, but you talked about how he knocked Douglas down. It was a good fight. Like, Mike wasn't bad for all of that bout. Like, he fought hard for many portions. People forget how good of a fight Douglas Tyson was. They remembered the result, but the fight itself was excellent.
It was a good fight. And if we just go back just 1 second, where you said Douglas, lost in the next fight, I remember distinctly when Douglas got on the scale for the rematch, for the first fight against Holyfield, when he lost the title and they announced his weight, I remember distinctly Lou Duva said, yes, we got him. Like, they knew that Douglas reached the pinnacle and then didn't care after that. Because yes, he could fight. He was a top flight amateur fighter with a lot of skills. And just looking at his body in the 2 fights, it was a different person, like, he came ready. But hindsight will also tell us that the big guys always gave Tyson problems. That's why I believe firmly that somebody like Lennox, to say, oh, he knocked out Tyson later, Lennox was always going to beat Mike Tyson. He just had the style that was not conducive for him. And I know they sparred as amateurs. I know the stories that came out of there of how Lennox would do it and how Cus D'Amato was really impressed with Lennox, and that Lennox was not on the radar for Mike Tyson, when if they should ever meet. So there was always a problem. And Douglas, being in shape, ready, exploited that, picked himself up off the canvas after taking a hell of an uppercut, Of course, King claimed that, the famous, he said it was a long count. It was a long count. It was probably a beat off. But Mayron, the referee at the time, knew that it was the end of the round. He knew it was the end of the round, and he wanted Douglas to get up because it was the end of the round. He didn't want to say 10 and out and the bell goes. You know what I mean? It was, so he 8, 9, and he doesn't say 10, and he lets him get to his feet, but he did a monstrous thing in beating somebody who, was thought to be invincible. But I always contend, and Roy Hamilton always said to me, he said, they talk about, no, he says, the greatest upset in boxing history was when Schmeling beat Lewis. That was the biggest upset in boxing history. That, Lewis, he says, Russ, you don't know. He says, Lewis, Schmeling was nothing. It was supposed to, Lewis was supposed to blast him out of there. That was it. You have no idea what that did. And when you look back on it and you read the books and the history of it, it was massive. It was massive, that Lewis lost to Schmeling.
And it's also the argument, we can maybe end on this, but you had talked about how the fight of the century is known as Joe Frazier-Ali, but you argued that the Lewis-Schmeling rematch is the biggest fight in the history of boxing, with the significance behind it, of course, of the political dilemma of the time and what Joe was representing and the pressure.
I think those two fights are without a doubt on a global scale,
right,
the two most important socially, political fights in the history of boxing. Now, you could make the argument about Jack Johnson and Jim Jeffries, the fight for the Great White Hope, but that was America. That was the what was bad about America. That was everything that was bad about the United States. That was black and white. That was segregation. That was everything bad about that America. But Lewis and Schmeling had international implications, and Ali and Frazier, with the Vietnam War, Ali having been stripped of his title, coming back to fight. I'll tell you another story that people don't know, and then we can end on this. And Ali came back and fought Quarry, Bonavena, and Frazier. Bang, bang, bang. He fought them so fast and took that fight so quick because he thought at any time that they could reverse their decision, put him in jail again. So. It was very important fight. I mean, both of those fights, Lewis and Schmeling and Ali Frazier, were to me the most important boxing matches in boxing history. So whenever they hear the question of if you could go back in any time, which would you go back to? There's no doubt I'm going back to either one of those because they're the most important ones. You know what? You mentioned something earlier about anniversaries. We should try to find, I know this makes more work for you, but we should try to find a this day in history moment for each one of the
100%.
And see what, because there's some great things that happen in boxing that we talk about. And I'm one of those guys that I want to honor the past, because if we have boxing today, if you're a fan, whoever's listening, you're a young guy, you're a young guy. If you love boxing today, if boxing is part of your life, if you're in boxing now, if you're doing boxing, if you win a title, if you're a contender, if you're trying to be an amateur champion, if you're in boxing today, it's because of the greats that came before you that paved the way to make the sport what it is and allows you to do what you do and love what you love now. So I like to honor the past and the greats who paved the way for us to be here.
I believe we call that a parting shot. So I agree.
Now we drop the mic, no?
Yeah, but I don't think you should drop your mic now because it's installed. So let's not go into a second part of the installation. But yes, it would be, I believe, as they refer, a mic drop. Calling Russ Anber. Again, we'll have a historical segment next week. It's always a fun, Russ. We try to say, hey, we're going to, talk a little bit here, a few topics here, and ends up being this discussion that people, I'm sure, enjoy. And I would like for us to continue this, of course, on a weekly basis as we've been doing. It's a lot of fun. I want to wish you a good evening, and we'll be reconvening next week.
If you want me to keep it short, you're going to have to be the one that controls the time, okay? Because if you let me go talking about boxing, we can sit here for another hour, no problem. No problem.
Hey, we're not traditional media. It's podcast, so no time limit, Russ. We go as we like. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back next week. Calling Russ Anber.
Thanks, brother.
Have a good evening, everyone.
All right.